The year is 2002. Fred Nicole had just established the world's first consensus V15 called Monkey Wedding in South Africa. A month later, Italian climber Christian Corre would pull onto an old classic called Shadowfax and send it first try, marking the world's first V13 flash. These two events happening back to back raised an interesting question. How long would it be for somebody to be able to flash the new hardest grade in the world? Well, little did he know, Christian Corre had just set off a 23-year-long saga to do just that. This ascent from Christian turned out to be way ahead of its time, taking more than 5 years for another 8B to be flashed, with Nagual from Paul Robinson and Cullinan from the legend Ty Landman. The next flash of this grade wouldn't come until 2009, with Keita Mogaki driving up to do the boulder La Danse des Barrages on his first try. Later this year though, something would happen that would shock the entire bouldering world for years to come. Confessions is a boulder located in Cristiano, Switzerland, first ascended by Dave Graham in 2005, in which he graded V14. 4 years later, 5 days before Christmas, a little known Czech climber named Adam Ondra pulls onto this Swiss test piece and sends it first try. At the time, flashing V13 was already insane enough, but flashing a V14 was completely out of this world. In true Adam Ondra style, he wasn't even really going for a flash burn, but magically was standing on top of the boulder in a few seconds, and he did not even find it very hard. However, when comparing it to the other 8Bs he's done, he couldn't get himself to take the 8B plus flash, because climbs like the Vice and the Dagger seemed more difficult to him. So, the world would have to wait for its first true V14 flash. But the world didn't have to wait too long, because in a little under 2 years, someone would do an even more impressive flash. That person was the American boulderer Daniel Woods. His target? Untly, a Fred Nicole first ascent, in which he proposed a whopping V15 grade for, making it one of the hardest boulder problems in the entire world. Daniel Woods is perhaps the greatest static crimper the world has ever seen. In his prime, even the world's best climbers would be shocked at how he could just dominate the worst holds imaginable. And Untly, well, it was perfectly in his style. He pulled on with little expectation, and much to everybody's surprise, climbed it perfectly, and was soon standing on top of the boulder. Was the quest to flash V15 going to end in only 9 years? Was the world really going to skip the 8B plus flash and go straight to the 8C flash? Well, not so fast. Even though this climb fits perfectly for Daniel, the world wasn't ready for a V15 flash. In fact, there had only ever been 2 proposed V16s in the entire world, so Daniel decided to downgrade Untly, but still claiming the world's first V14 flash. A month later, Adam Ondra would return with a vengeance, and did the first flash of one of the hardest boulder problems in all of France at the time, Gecko Assist, graded at 8B+. The climb is a pretty reachy compression problem, fitting Adam absolutely perfectly. He also had great conditions during the ascent, but because he was 2 days on already, and it didn't feel fully limit for him, he decided to also downgrade this climb to 8B, similarly to what he did on Confessions. Unlike Confessions though, which to this day is rightfully considered V13, Gecko Assist is now widely considered to be 8B+, making Adam Ondra the second person ever to flash V14. Similar to Christian in 2002, these ascents would prove to be way ahead of their time, as while more and more climbers began flashing V13, no one would repeat the incredible feat of flashing a V14 until June of 2015. Remember that guy who holds the current hardest flash in the world, Daniel Woods? Well, back in 2007, he established what Thai landman would go on to say is the test piece of his generation. This boulder was the Green 45 project, an incredibly crimpy and shouldery test piece located in Rocky Mountain National Park that featured what Daniel describes as the worst hold he's ever grabbed. A right-handed lock-off on a 2-finger needle. Because of this ridiculous move, Daniel would go on to give this boulder, which he named Jade, V15. And in June of 2015, Adam Ondra, fresh off of 2 days of World Cup competitions, would have one of the most legendary bouldering days ever, flashing Don't Get Too Greedy V13
Easy. Good, tranquilo. It's wet.
and Jade, back to back, right before his airplane flight. So, after 13 long years, the quest to flash V15 was finally over. Surely a climb, which Daniel Woods describes as having the worst hold he's ever grabbed, must be the world's first V15 flash, right? Well, it turns out no, because a few years earlier, another legendary climber named Carlo Traversi would be the first to downgrade Jade to V14, where it has settled ever since. So despite Ondra having one of the most legendary performances of all time, our quest continues. Hi there. If you're enjoying this video, I'd really appreciate it if you'd liked and subscribed, as I am trying to get to 3,000 subs by the end of the month. Thank you. Over the next few years, V13 flashes became commonplace among the world's best climbers, but V14 flashes remained few and far between. In fact, from 2012 all the way to 2020, there were only a total of 4 V14 flashes, showing just how difficult this feat, which now we take for granted, really is. One of these flashes was Catalan Witness the Fitness, a famous Chris Sharma roof problem, which he graded V15. This boulder is a reference to the original Witness the Fitness, an even more famous Chris Sharma roof problem, located in Arkansas. Similar to Adam on Jade, right before his airplane flight, Jakob Schubert and some fellow climbers took a trip to this famous boulder, where he did yet another historic flash. However, similar to the previous V15 flashes, Jakob felt as though it was more like V14, because when compared to the other V15s he's tried, it felt significantly easier for him. So our quest continues yet again. However, as time went on, the level of bouldering skill continued to climb. The world's first V17 had been proposed 2 years ago, and maybe if people really were climbing V17, then it might finally be time for the first V15 flash. We would get a glimpse of this progress in May of 2022, where we would have the first in a long string of devastatingly close attempts on V15 flashes. The boulder was yet another Dave Graham first ascent in Switzerland, named Foundation's Edge, put up all the way back in 2013, in which he graded V15. The climber, an up-and-coming boulderer from the UK named Aidan Roberts. Aidan reportedly had a minor dab, then dry-fired off the last hard move on his flash attempt. He then did the entire climb second go, but tragically slipped off the wet top out and never completed the climb. Then, in December of the same year, another climber from the UK named Will Bosey would have a similar experience on the world's first proposed V15 named Dreamtime, also in Switzerland. Shortly after flashing a V13 named Flash Flood, Will Bosey would pull onto Dreamtime and get incredibly close to making history. On his flash burn, Will would make it past the crux of this power endurance test piece before slipping off and ultimately sending it on his fourth try. Now, we've seen many downgrade flashes in this video already, but probably the one that stands out the most in this entire saga is Japanese comp climber Tomoa Narasaki doing Gakido, originally graded V16 by Nomura Shinichiro on his very first try, then first ascenting a low start in the same session. The problem had been previously downgraded to V15 by Ryuichi Murai, but Tomoa, after flashing it, felt as though it was more like hard V14. What is confusing is that according to Nomura, Tomoa stated that this boulder is harder than Decided, another famous V14 that he flashed, as well as harder than being Asagi Madeira, which to this day is still considered V15. But perhaps this was the new hardest flash ever done. This takes us to climbing's strongest year ever, 2025. V17s had become the norm, popping up left and right. Surely, this will be the year for the mythical 8C flash to finally become a reality, right? Well, in January, Austrian climber Nikolai Uznik starts us off with yet another close call, topping out a Kim Marshner line called Forgotten Gem in Coronaco on his second try, reportedly even being close on the flash as well. It's important to note that Forgotten Gem had been downgraded before, but recent ascensionists have all taken V15 for it. Later in the month, we would witness yet another contender for the world's hardest flash. Remember that Czech climber who can't stop flashing and downgrading some of the world's hardest boulders? Well, he's back. This time in La Pedriza, Spain. Before the attempt, he realized that he had forgotten his shorts, but as per his style, still wanted to get every ounce of performance out of himself for the flash. So Adam Ondra decided to raw dog it, performing the world's hardest flash ever done without pants. The boulder, named El Elegido, was graded V14/15. This is the only boulder that I could find where no climber had deviated from the slash grade before the flash downgrade had occurred. Then in May, English rock climber Hamish MacArthur pulls onto a board-style, crimpy Aidan Roberts first ascent, located in Wild Basin. He got agonizingly close to the flash, just stabbing on the last hard move. It's important to note though, that Hamish used a Morpho toe hook beta that was not done on the first ascent, which he and others have thought makes this climb V14. So even if he had flashed it, it more than likely would have been downgraded. In July, we would be edged once more, this time by Pennsylvania climber and 1/3 of the Wheelrock brothers, Noah Wheeler, who took a trip to Cascade, Idaho to try out 3 of Matt Foltz's recent V15s. On July 2nd, Noah would conquer the final empire in just his second try, downgrading the climb to V14 in the process. 2 days later, he would pull onto the stand start of another V15 called the Hero of Age, which was graded V13, and did the climb first try, but dabbed on the last hard move. Then, he would send the V15 low start on his very next try, proposing a slash grade for it in the process. Just a few days after this incredible performance from Noah though, something insane happened. Remember Foundation's Edge? The boulder that Aiden Roberts had nearly flashed 3 years ago? Well, someone else had their sights on this boulder as well. That person was German climber Yannick Flohe. After climbing almost all the other hard boulders in Fione, Yannick waited for the perfect day, one where he would have good skin, good conditions, and a good mental game. That day came on July 9th of 2025, 23 years after Christian Corre flashed the world's first V13. On this day, Yannick Flohe would pull onto this Dave Graham test piece and do this.
Ærlig. Ærlig, Yannick. Come on. Nice, come on. Geht. Come on. Ærlig, Yannick. Komm jetzt. Ærlig. Komm, Vollgas. Komm! Can you guys maybe...
As of recording this, February of 2026, this is still widely considered the world's first V15 flash. Will this finally be the one to stand? History seems to be skeptical, but perhaps we finally have gotten to an end to this more than 2-decade-long saga. But we're not done yet, because a month later, in August, French climber Jules Marchand takes a trip to Magic Wood. Back in 2020, Swiss climber Giuliano Cameroni would put up what is now one of the most famous lines in the entire world, called Power of Now. The original easier version of the line was already given 8C or V15, but as the kilterboard power climbing style had evolved, this magical line involving massive moves on good holds has settled to be around lower end V14. In 2021, Belgian climber Simon Lorenzi was attempting this climb, but he was too short to reach the starting holds. So instead, he first ascended an even harder version of the climb, adding another massive, powerful move to the boulder. In an incredibly bold move, Jules Marchand, one of the best board climbers in the world, decided to forego the original line and pulled on directly from these two underclings. And well, it paid off.
Oh putain de monstre. Allez mec. Allez encore. À droite t'as le bac là, d'accord. Ouais.
But there is one person who is widely considered to be the greatest flasher of all time, who just so happens to be the greatest rock climber to ever live. This person had already done the hardest boulder grade in the world, the hardest sport climb, the hardest trad climb, the hardest sport climbing flash, and the hardest trad climbing flash. Could the aging GOAT keep up with these young V15 flashers? Well, as it turns out, since we last checked on him, he had already been on a generational run. In 2025 alone, including his hardest flash ever of El Elegido, Adam Ondra would flash a whopping 6 different V14 boulders. To put this monumental feat into perspective, from the beginning of climbing history, all the way till March of 2022, there had only been 6 V14 boulder flashes by people other than Ondra, combined. And here's Ondra doing the same feat by himself in a single year. Oh, And did I mention that bouldering isn't even his main focus? After seeing the news of the world's hardest Flash, Adam would go on a mission in November of 2025 to fulfill one of the last things on his climbing bucket list before he was too old to do so. He would first seriously attempt this on Ziggurat, a Nicoloseria first ascent located in Italy. He had a great first attempt, but his weakness in toe hooks caused him to lose control of a hold deep into the boulder, and as a result, he dabbed on his pads before dry firing.
No!
Adam would go on to send Ziggurat on his third try from the ground. Later in the month though, he realized what Yannick had earlier in the year, that there may be no V15 that is more flashable than the Dave Graham test piece in Switzerland called Foundation's Edge. And just like Yannick had earlier in the year, Adam would pull onto Foundation's Edge 17 years after he had flashed Confessions, and would send it in a single try. But Adam didn't feel like he was done for the day yet. Flashing Foundation's Edge lit a fire under him, and he realized he still had more to give before the day would end. So, Adam goes to Fione to try for another V15 flash in the same day. The boulder, Big Nose, a Dylan Chouat first ascent, named after the crazy fat pinch that you grab in the middle of the climb. Adam would get through most of the boulder, but just barely hit a hold wrong to miss out on 2 V15 flashes in a single day, doing Big Nose on his third try.
Ah!
Then, just 2 days later after Adam had yet another historic bouldering day, the climbing world would be shocked with perhaps the hardest flash yet. Remember Nikolai Uznik, the guy who did Forgotten Gem on his second try? Well, he wanted revenge, so he booked a trip again to try to flash another crimpy Swiss test piece called La Force Tranquille, a line that Daniel Woods had first ascended all the way back in 2011. This is widely considered to be one of the best hard lines in all of Switzerland, and unlike Foundation's Edge, La Force Tranquille is considered to be very solid at V15. On November 13th, Nikolai Uznik would take a deep breath, pull onto the boulder, and do this.
Come on.
Unlike the other V15 flashes, Nikolai didn't climb this boulder very cleanly, having a foot slip, a dry fire, and multiple readjustments. But somehow, he stayed on the wall, and even though his fingers were really numb, he was able to rest for a while before topping the boulder out. Oh no. What is perhaps the most devastating thing I've ever seen in climbing? Nikolai dry fires off the top of La Force Tranquille, which would have probably been the new hardest flash ever done. Watching this reminded me of when I was 13 years old and watched Foewi get 98% on Sonic Wave when the hardest in the world was still Bloodbath. Similar to Sonic Wave, Perhaps the world was not ready for a Flash of this caliber yet, and we'll have to wait in 2026 for more. So this takes us to the present day. Out of the 241 Flashes graded 8B or harder, 204 are currently 8B, 34 are 8B+, and 3 are 8C. The most flashed boulder at each grade is Moonshadow V13 with 8 flashes, Amandla V14 with 3, and Foundation's Edge with 2. But when will the first V16 flash happen? What about 17? Will we have to wait another 16 years like we did going from V14 to V15? Well, with the amount of young talent coming up, I have a feeling that it'll come sooner than that. But of course, we'll just have to wait and see. When do you think we'll see the first V16 flash? How about V17? Tune in next time to find out.